Newport News, Virginia, but Norfolk, Virginia, which was what they called a retraining command. And there I was in charge of the athletic program. And I was there for, 2 years. During that time, I was in charge of the recreation program there. And we had a baseball and basketball team and played on both. And was married at that time. And then when I got released, they tried to get me to resign, and I told them I didn't think I wanted to do that. So I moved back, and I went to school at Pitt State. No, first of all, I went to Wichita, and 2 years, because I'd had 2 years of junior college, and I got 2 years, and I had the GI Bill, so I got my degree at Wichita. And then my first coaching job was at St. Paul, in the town where I graduated from. And I was there for 4 years. And then I came to Cheney, and I was there 5 years, to Wichita West. And there I was assistant basketball, assistant football. I was a sophomore coach in basketball, and I helped with football and baseball. The next year I was assistant coach at the varsity level in basketball. And then the next year I was the head coach in basketball. And that's both of my sons. I had the privilege of coaching them in basketball, which was a good deal. And at that time, of course, then when I left Wichita, I came back to Cheney, stayed here, and that's when we went to the state tournament for the first time in basketball. I came back to Cheney in 1970, and then I went to Tonganoxie, and I was there for 14 years at Tonganoxie, a long 14 years. I had some great kids. Kids are going to be kids, but kids want to be cared for. And at Tonganoxie, it was a major, but it ended up with many blessings. I'll tell you an example. When I went to Tonganoxie, I went to a basketball clinic. I'll back up a little bit. I spent every year that I was coaching, I always spent the summers working basketball camps. I worked at KU. I worked at North Carolina. I worked at K-State. And I worked at smaller colleges. And I had an opportunity at KU to scout for them, but I was going to scout. Larry Brown had asked me if I would, when I was at Tonganoxie, if I would come down and scout his team and give him his scouting report. And that was supposed to happen, but he transferred and took a job somewhere else. And at that time, I did not want to leave. But one of the main things, one of the bigger things in my life was Tonganoxie. It was when I went to Tonganoxie, there was a young man who was a freshman who was potentially a good athlete, but he wasn't a bad person, but he would not perform to his ability. They told me that if I could get anything out of him, I deserved a prize. Lonnie Kruger, who was a coach at K-State at that time, told me that. He said, if you ever get anything out of him, Coach, you deserve a medal. So the first thing I did when I went to Tonganoxie, JR was not, I went up about 3 weeks early because football practice started and we had to move and she was getting everything ready. So I decided that I would go out and talk to this young man. So about 10 o'clock in the morning, I go out to his home, meet his mother, introduce myself, tell her I wanted to see. His name was Jay. She said, well, he's in there in bed. So I visited with him and very pleasant. So football practice started. 2 weeks went by. And the third week, he showed up. And he came to the station I was coaching, and here's the exact words. I told him, I said, you know what? If I were the head coach, your butt wouldn't be out here. And he looked at me like, but anyway, he went ahead and he became one of later on in life, he became the athlete of the year in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He was a starter as a sophomore in football and basketball, baseball. A great, great human being. And right now, every holiday or anything, he always calls and leaves a message. He never forgets. And as a matter of fact, he put me up for at Tonganoxie, they had the Tonganoxie Hall of Fame. And he called me and said, Coach, I put you up for the Hall of Fame. And I told him, Jay, that will never happen. Well, it did happen. And like I said, he calls, that's one of the highlights of my